Welcome to the Community of Excellence podcast, where lived experience leads the way. I'm your host, Mil Sunar, and together we'll be exploring powerful conversations at the heart of mental health, recovery, and peer support.
Hope for a generation, just beyond my reach, not beyond my sight. Hope for a generation.
Welcome to Community of Excellence podcast. I have Selina Akhtar with me today. She's been a colleague for a long time at North London Foundation Trust. I'm a peer and lived experience manager, and Selina is dialogue trainer with lived experience. How are you today, Selina?
I'm good, thank you. Suffering from hay fever and lots of bites and stings from the garden. But yeah, apart from that, I'm good.
I want to ask to you and our audience, is there any season that is not hay fever season in this country? Because I didn't grow up here, I constantly get that.
I think you need to find the difference between allergies and hay fever because I have all year allergies, but in the hay fever season, things like grass, pollen really get to me because they give me itchy eyes, nose, ears, skin, all of those sorts of things. So I think there is a
Thank you for sharing that. I don't know what it did for our audience, but it did explain there's a situation in my back. That's all I'm going to say.
just to say I'm no doctor, by the way. So please take advice from your local pharmacist and your GP if you have any concerns.
Absolutely. And we are here to talk about our lived experience to share with you. It's not advice. It's just for your ears and enjoyment, hopefully. So, Selina, what are you doing right now, but also how you came into peer support work?
I work within North London Foundation Trust, and my role is Dialogue Plus practice educator lead with lived experience. So I deliver Dialogue Plus training, which is our new care planning tool across the trust. So we have 5 boroughs. So I deliver the training across the 5 boroughs. But Dialogue Plus is also a national care planning change. So I'm sure there's equivalent to me across the whole of England. I have met a few, which was really great to see that there are people in my position who are delivering training across other trusts. So that's my role. I came into this kind of work was I became unwell in my mid-30s after self-medicating, after trying to self-manage my voices. I had a few life changes that happened, which kind of sent my emotions and also my voices into overdrive. So I ended up coming through to mental health services through the justice system. And then I had 3 very quick admissions. So I was admitted and then discharged, and then I was admitted again quite rapidly, and then again. So on the 3rd discharge, I kind of got what my condition was, and it was explained to me by then key worker on the ward who really sat down with me and kind of talked about what is happening to me, why the medication is important, and the fact that what are my hopes and dreams for the future. So we kind of talked about what kind of things I'd like to do. So one of the things was to return back to work. So because I was working up until I became unwell, and I wanted to go back to work because it's one of the things that gave me purpose, but also helped with my mental health as well by distracting me with work things. So I wasn't focused on the voices. So going back to work was really important for me. But then when I started to look for work, I kept getting rejections after rejections because you had to declare your criminal record and you had to declare your mental health on application forms. And back then, mental health wasn't something that was talked about as widely as it is now. We didn't have...
When was this roughly?
This was roughly 2000. So back then it was something that was to be contained and maintained, but not kind of supported and for you to live a purposeful life. So basically people thinking about going into work. I remember my first care coordinator saying to me, "Oh, Selina, you don't have to rush this, you can get all the benefits that you need to help you. You have a lovely home. You don't have to return back to work until you're ready." There was no encouragement. So it was really about just keeping my mental health stable was the aim. So then I joined this work program, which was my probation officer suggested to me. And through that work program, they were in partnership with, back then it was called Barnet, Enfield and Haringey Mental Health Trust. And they were looking at recruiting peer workers, but you had to do their training program and then you could go and work as a peer worker within the trust. So they were working in partnership. But at the time, they were looking for people that wanted to do permitted work. So there were some people who wanted to remain on benefits but didn't want to come away fully, but could do some work. And there was people who wanted to work part-time because of childcare. And there was people like me who just wanted to jump in and go back into full-time work. And I think that was a really great scheme. I was based in Haringey, so there was 3 of us from that program that ended up in Haringey. And what I really appealed to me about the role was when I was on the wards, I was always advocating for patients, for them not having been heard, for them not having their cultural food or their religious beliefs being able to practice them when on the ward. Also, just in general, because of my own experience of having my child come and see me on the ward, about having a safer space and a place that was for family, so that they weren't brought onto the ward. All of these things I was doing while I was on the wards. So that part appealed to me. That part of my role was being an advocate or a voice for service users and carers. And the other part of it was actually feeling that I was part of a professional body, that I was based within the NHS. I could be part of a team and I was viewed by my teammates as something that I had to offer. My lived experience was something that was valuable to be offered. So I started to work in the assessment team. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was the first where the referrals came in and we saw people maybe once or twice before they were moved on to another part of their journey. So that is where I started. And then I continued to work in the peer role, but I moved from the trust and I worked in most London trusts. And that was because at the time, in my time anyway, there was no progression for peer workers. And some trusts were employing peer workers at a band 2, which is what BEH were doing. And some trusts were employing them at band 3, and some trusts were for senior peers were employing them at band 4. So basically, I just moved around all the trusts to gain access to different teams, to work in different teams, but also to have more responsibility. And that is one of those ways was to go up in the bandings. So my background, I have lots of different types of lived experience, from perinatal to being a rough sleeper for a year and a half to being under home treatment team, receiving crisis interventions, going through the justice system, being also having a care coordinator and being long-term under CMH community mental health teams. So I kind of moved different teams. But where I found really great kind of mentorship, which was the big shift for me from a band 4 to where I am now, was when I started to work in inpatient services. And my background is housing and benefits. That was what my original job was before I became unwell. And I was doing that naturally as part of my peer role on the wards, supporting service users to access their benefits, supporting them to make sure that their accommodation is kept for them while they're in hospital, and sorting out their housing benefits. So all that stuff I was doing as part of my peer role, but with the service user. So I wasn't doing it for them. I was sitting with them while we were sorting these things out. And the social worker, who only worked part-time across the 3 wards, noticed that I was doing this. And so they offered me part mentorship, and it also offered me the associate social worker role. So I got seconded to do that role, and the social worker then mentored me doing that role, but then also suggested that I undertake the social work course. And in the beginning, I thought they were joking. And I said, there is no way I'm going to be able to study or do this. And who is going to take somebody with lived experience? And can somebody with lived experience ever be a social worker? And they said to me that you're thinking ahead too much. What you need to do is think about doing the course first, and then all those other things can be managed after. And even though I left the trust just before I started my social work course, because I had to self-fund it, the social worker actually mentored me through the whole course. So we would meet once a week and we would discuss the coursework. They would support me to understand what the coursework is and supported me to access extra learning support. So for me, I have dyslexia. So what they arranged was for me to put everything on a dictaphone, including punctuations and everything. And my nephew was allowed to type it all up for me. And we had to submit both the recordings and obviously what my nephew typed up when I submitted my work. So that really helped me my doing the course. I may have slightly digressed slightly, but what I'm trying to say is that the reason I'm explaining all of this is because there is no straightforward route to progression in peer work. So my route took me around a lot of different houses until I finally ended up back at North London Foundation Trust, who Barnet Enfield and Haringey had merged with Camden Islington. And I had to take a step down because there was no openings for a lived experience social worker within the trust. So I had to take a step down, took a banding down to be able to get a role within the trust. And also I didn't want to be a mental health social worker. That was always something that I always said from the get-go, that my passion is with older adults, and I didn't want to do working age adult social work, but I wanted to do children or older adults. So those are my two areas in social work. So when I took a step back, it was fortunate when I joined, they were doing the open dialogue training, which is another form of working, but it's majority bringing the support network of the service user together, including the mental health team, and having a conversation with the service user and using reflective practice. So that kind of really felt really holistic to me. So I became part of the team that was delivering that within Barnet, Enfield and Haringey. As I did that, then somehow the role of workforce manager came up within the trust, and I applied and I got the 1 year role. So it was just for 1 year to do that role. And like with everything that I do, I give it my 100%. So I did that role. But while doing that role, I realised that after a year, there was going to be no more funding. So luckily for me, one of my other skills is actually building networks while I'm at work. So meeting people from different teams, having conversations. And I just so happened the project management team that were dealing with the community transformation approached me and said, would I come and deliver or co-deliver the Dialogue Plus training with a clinical lead, and I will be the lived experience lead. So that is how I ended up delivering Dialogue Plus training. The clinical lead that was doing the training left because they got a different role. And so instead of recruiting someone, they asked me if I would continue it, but full-time basis. And they will develop a permanent role, which they did. And it went out to advert. I applied like others did. And I was offered the role permanently. So that's how I've ended up in my role now. And in my whole journey, you will hear that I have had support from other colleagues from other professions, but I have never felt supported by a service user lead of a trust, or a peer lived experience lead of a trust, or the peer workforce lead of a trust, or a director with lived experience from a trust. I have never felt supported by the peer lived experience workforce. And that part remains my sadness, because I think a lot of people like me fall through the net because of the lack of support. And it's just fortunate that I had got support from other professionals that noticed my strengths, that then helped me to go further.
Yeah, thank you for that. So actually, it segues nicely to the next section, which is now there's a national rollout of recruiting peer support workers or lived experience workers, and the workforce grew nationally. So there are more service users who heard about it, who applied for it, became peer support workers, or thinking about it. With the good and the bad, there's a lot of, as you said, support that happened for you at the time, but maybe not a systemic, established support or specific to your area of profession. It had been a long time since the first time you started. So, what would you say has progressed since then? What would you say to people who are thinking about coming into this work? What keeps you going? What to expect and what not to expect?
I would say, I would say in the last, maybe I'd say 8 years, there has been a shift in the way that the peer lived experience workforce is being supported. And I think that's because some of us that started way back when have now become in positions where we can offer mentorship or support. And so we are the ones that are leading the way. The other thing that's changed, I think, is that there is more of a structure that starts from the top to the bottom, or the bottom to the top, whichever way you look at it. So there is more people that are in positions, at entry level positions, that are seniors, that have been doing the role maybe 2 or 3 years, that are either leading within the trust as well. So I think there has been a real shift to kind of identify there is a need of a structure if you want to build in sustainability and to actually keep our peer lived experience workforce within their roles. There has also been a real shift in allyship for colleagues with peer lived experience that are in the workforce. So there's people who may not have declared lived experience but are really wanting to work with and alongside peer lived experience staff to actually support service users and carers. So I think there's more conversations within individual teams that are happening. So you have a manager who really is passionate about having peer lived experience colleagues in the team, and will actively go out to try to find funding and to recruit. And I think the biggest change has been because of the community transformation over the last 5 years, is bringing on board the voluntary sector agencies, who then have been given the responsibility to actually recruit and support the peer lived experience workforce. So the trusts are not directly employing them, the voluntary sector are, but they're embedded within the trust community mental health teams. And I think that has helped the conversation move forward. So, saying all the things that are really great, there is a few things that we still need a lot of work on. And that is for people that are in positions of leading on the workforce. There needs to be more people that actually have worked as peers in that position to really understand what it's like for a peer to work in a community mental health team or any team who has to share their lived experience. So, what kind of support that peer would need and understanding that would need I think you can only really get it if you actually worked as a peer. And when you're in that position where you're making workforce decisions, or you're trying to build strategies, or you are trying to look at what the needs are of this professional workforce of peer lived experience workers, I think it's more authentic when somebody has done that role who's in that position. So that would be one thing. The other thing is we really need to look at gender. I mean, to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of gender. I think I don't identify people because of their gender. But one of the things that has been coming up again and again, especially from service users and carers, is the fact that there isn't gender representation of our peer lived experience workers. If you look at all the data, most peers are from majority from one community, from one age, certain age brackets. And I think there's a reason for that, but we haven't kind of really focused on why that is and how we're actually going out to recruit, where we're going out to recruit as well. So I think that is really important to look at, because sometimes when you're in a community team, you have a service user. It's something that happened to me that really only wanted a female to be supporting them. But at the time, there wasn't a female key worker in a community team that was available to support the person. So as a peer worker, that it meant that I could start the support and be that bridge between the key worker and make the service user feel safe so they can actually have a conversation. So I think we underestimate the effects of gender and within peer work roles. So I think that needs to be looked at a bit more. Now, for any new peers, and I'm sure you will know this as well now, that any new peers coming in, is that the fact that we really need them is key. We do. We really do need them. But one of the things I would say is that as a new peer, you really need to be sure that this is a role that you can do because you have a strong support network in place. You will need a strong support network outside of work as well as in work when you start the role. So one of the things that I did was, when I first started my first role as a peer, I did say it's really important I have supervision regularly. It has to be set once a month, and the time, unless it's life or death, can't change. Because for me, routine was really important and structure. So I kind of articulated that. But what's important is because I know that about myself. So it is really important that you spend some time reflecting on what would you need to help you, to support you within your role. And don't be afraid to actually say that when you start a role. The other thing is make sure you have a strong support network outside of your work role, so that your friends, family are aware about your role, that you have one person or two people that you can connect with if you need to. Because when you initially start, that support is fundamental. The other thing is whatever they write in the job description, that isn't what your role's going to be. Your role is going to be a bit of everything, and everything's going to be thrown at you. And what is the key is for you to know what your role is. So do a lot of reading. There's a lot of stuff about peer work that's out there. There's a lot of organizations that are out there that in the voluntary sector that is doing peer work. Mind has great information on peer work. So understand what is it you would like the role to be, and don't be afraid to write them down and take them with you. Also, in your induction, make sure that you do a lot of observing and a lot of listening as you're doing your induction. And if someone says to you, like they tried to say to me, is Selina, I'm really sorry, but this person, the key worker, hasn't come in today. Could you support me to see this person? It's important you say, I'm actually on my induction for the next 2 weeks. I don't feel comfortable in doing that right now. Because as peer workers and people who have used services, because we really know what it's like, we really want to jump in with 2 feet first, and we really want to do the best for our service users. But just have a reflection and think why you want to do that. Is that for you, or is that actually going to be helpful for the service user? So it's important that you understand your role so that you can support the service user appropriately. And lastly, I would say it's the best thing I ever did. Despite all the challenges, despite the lack of support at times, despite not being able to progress as fast as I would have done in any other role, I would not change my role for anything. I love the way that it helps me connect to people. I love the fact that my role allows me to bring my authentic self into a space. I love the fact that my role ables to challenge where others may not be able to, because who's going to argue with someone if you say this was my experience? And also, I love the way that doing my role as I've done over the years, I can see the real changes that's happened to me as a person in how I've developed and how I've become who I am today. And I don't think I would be the person I am today if I hadn't gone on this peer role journey over the last 9, 10 years. So I would say it's a great thing, but I would also say that you need to make sure it's what you really want to do.
Thank you for that. When you think of a great day at work you had, what was it like? What happened very briefly and how you were feeling?
This one was a challenge for me because I've had a lot of great moments in my work that were experience that challenged me as somebody who was in a lived experience role, but also made me see what my role is possible to do with my role. So I'll give you 2 quick examples. The thing that challenged me was I was asked as part of self-care project that I was doing, involved in, I was asked to be part of a photo shoot. And I thought, well, okay, part of a photo, getting your photo taken can't be a really big thing. But then I was told it was going to be taken by Rankin, who was a famous photographer who takes pictures in black and white. And then not only that, but my portrait will be hung in the Saatchi Gallery for 2 weeks as part of the NHS celebrations, NHS charity celebrations. So there's lots of things there. I don't like having my picture taken. That's for once. That was a real challenge. Secondly, I value my personal space. So I remember taking the photo shoot. There was people touching my hair, people touching my scarf, people touching the fold of my dress. And that really was a challenge for me because I don't like people being in my personal space. So as a personal development, when I finished that and I saw the finished article and I saw it hanging at the Saatchi Gallery, that was a real personal achievement for me that I would never thought about doing. So that, on one note, that was an experience through work. The other thing is my role as a peer. There was this person similar age to me that had become very unwell and had entered into the hospital. But it was quite clear that there was a lot of historical trauma that they were unable to articulate. And the team just wanted to send this person to rehab. And I remember having this conversation within the ward round and saying, look, this person had a life before they entered the ward. They had not become known to the police. They had not had any antisocial behaviour recorded against them. They has managed to stay without being on benefits for nearly 4 years. And the only reason they came into contact with us is because they were in rent arrears and the council wanted to evict them. And that was the reason why we have got involved. Otherwise, if the rent was being paid, we would never have known about this person. So what we need to do is spend some time trying to get to know them, communicating with them at the level that they're ready to communicate with us with. And so in the MDT, it was agreed while the person was with us that we would make this attempt, but they asked if I would be the person, and I said I would be quite happy to. So the first day I went, I knocked on the door. There was no response from her room on the ward, but I left a note under the door which had my name and a time that I was going to come back and see them. That was going to be the next day. And then I came again and I knocked on the door. There was no response. This kind of went on for about a couple of weeks. Then all of a sudden, when I knocked on the door, there was a crack in the door opened. And then the person never said anything, but they listened to everything that I said. And the one word they said to me was home. So they really wanted to go back home. So I realized if I was to support this person, that needed to be the goal. So then I worked with the person for another week around going back home, and that if they were willing to come out of their room, then we can look at visiting her home, seeing what we needed to do to get her back home. So after another 2 weeks, the ward finally agreed that I can take her on a home visit, check out the home. And so when I went to the home, I could see this person was a very proud person. There was lots of family photos on the wall. They were very well dressed. It was quite clear that it was a family home at some point. Something happened and then the family was no more. But I could also see the other side where the electricity got cut off, the gas got cut off, and they were living by candlelight and they weren't reaching out for help and support. I also found out when we went for the home visit, a few of their neighbours came knocking and said that we were really worried about you. We hadn't seen you around. I'm glad to see that you're okay. The person still wasn't talking a lot. But what that showed me is that the neighbours actually cared about this person. This person had lived there for a long time. So anyway, a long story short, instead of sending her to rehab, which the doctors were adamant about, I recommended that we send her back home, but with a care package. But also, I worked with the council to clear her rent arrears, so we got her benefits backdated. And working with the council, they moved her from the 2-bedroom house that she was to a 1-bedroom, but in the same block. So she didn't move away from the area that she's known. And as soon as all that happened, I had to leave the trust. But what I got fed back after was the fact that she's doing really well. She has carers coming morning and afternoon. She's in her 1-bedroom flat. She keeps it completely immaculate. She does her routine, goes to the market, buys her vegetables and comes home, and then the carer helps her cook the meals. And that is one of the reason why I felt that was a good experience for me is that it shows what a peer worker can achieve. You don't have to be a professional to see what is right in front of you. And also, I think there was part of me that connected with her that if I didn't have the support that I had from my friends and family, I could have ended up in a rehab quite easily. And the fact that seeing someone's strengths, what they were before, not just what we're seeing now, was really key to help the person to continue to live their life in a meaningful way. But what's meaningful to them? It may not be the same to me and it may not be the same to everyone, but it's about what's meaningful to them. So, and that is when I realized actually peers and lived experience workers have a lot of power. We just don't have influence. And that is when I decided things needed to change. And then that's it. And that was along my path to change after that.
Thank you. And we asked if there is a theme that you want to talk about. We talked about talking about self-care, which is a huge buzzword at the moment. And I can feel half of the audience cringing and the other half maybe has just started to think about it and give it a chance. Can we start with a definition? What do you mean, you yourself, when you're talking about self-care?
Yeah. I mean, I'm with that half that cringe at the word self care, but I couldn't, there is no other word to describe it at this
Same here.
moment. But what it is that for me, I can tell you where this came from. So, all my life, I had to be somebody else's daughter. I had to be somebody else's sister. I then had to be somebody else's wife, somebody else's mother, and then somebody else's grandmother. But I never found who I was for myself. So, who is Selina? I was never just Selina. So, I think what becoming unwell and then actually on my journey of knowing who I am as Selina, having that space to think about that, I realized that I need different things to the rest of my family and friends to help support me. So I love opera. My culture and my religion detests music. So I could never listen to that kind to opera when I was growing up. But I realized I have this real passion for opera. So part of becoming Selina was about opening myself up to going to opera, to listening to opera, to actually connecting with it in the way that I know that I do connect with it. So now I use it as a way to relax me, to calm me down. If you want to call that self care, I don't know. But also, it's about showing everybody that that is part of me. And to respect me would have to respect my need to listen to opera. So that is part of it.
So what you just told me, first of all, is incredibly interesting because opera stresses me out. I tried so hard, it just didn't happen for me. And I love theater, all performing arts. And I do love opera as an idea, but when I was in the room, it didn't work for me. So, first of all, that's fascinating to me. But second of all, what I hear from what you say is you finding out that something, again, interesting to you was there, but maybe you haven't thought about entertaining it. And then there being a certain social resistance to that association between opera and yourself, maybe. And maybe it stopped you for a while. And finally, you made the decision to step into the unknown because you think you liked opera, but you haven't engaged with it. And then it worked for you, and I'm going to assume it was accepted around you, and now you can enjoy that special thing for you, even if it doesn't make sense to people around you. It's happening, and it's okay. Would that be an accurate evaluation of what you just said to me?
Definitely.
So I think starts with self-awareness. It's the first step. But then taking a step into the unknown, I think there's a lot of expectation around we have to justify something we enjoy to ourselves. We have to justify if we're paying attention to ourselves. And it can be because of our gender or culture or upbringing. And so I find those nuances very important. Could you share a little bit of detail, like when you became aware of the fact that you liked what was a feeling that connected you to that? And what was that journey like where you haven't engaged and then decided to, and how it went for you?
My first experience was I was in a charity shop and I found a CD that was Verdi and it was the music. So I have learned that I've got a passion for Italian opera as well. So I actually took that home and I listened to it. And as I was listening to it, and as you do, you just scroll on your phone, like I was just scrolling on my phone. And then all of a sudden, this 5 day Italian opera festival flagged up on my phone that was in Italy. So I then booked myself. See, I do things like either I'm all in or I'm not. So I'm one of these people that if I find something, I go all in and then I'll say it didn't work or it did work. So anyway, I went on that trip for the 5 day opera and it was all the Italian op over 5 days, and they were at the Colosseum. And the funny thing was, I stayed on Lake Garda, but I stayed in a monastery. So they rent out their rooms in a monastery, but obviously they have certain rules. So in there, but actually, what I found really interesting was the calming nature of being in a monastery and then going to the opera and then coming back was really, I realized that is me, that I don't need the bright lights, lots of bars and lots of loud people. I mean, I've realized that I value stillness and I also value being able to go and do things that you want to do, but return back to the peace and serenity of actually in a safe space. So that one experience kind of helped me to realize that this is the path I want to continue. So I don't know about you, but I have a box. I'm not going to call it a toolbox because that's also another thing that's kind of the terminology has kind of gone a different way. But I have a box which, when I feel slightly unsafe or I feel slightly overwhelmed or I feel the voices are really quite loud on a specific day, what I do have is a box which consists of the certain Italian opera CDs. It has some smelly things. It has a pair of earplugs and it has always got £20 in there because I get a takeaway. So that's what happens. That I need to have something special to eat to make me feel good. So there's always £20 in there. And then I have different types of books, things that have helped me to become, I mean, you call it self awareness, I call it more awakening. So, books that I've come across that have kind of awakened parts in me that I didn't know existed. So, those are in there as well. So, I kind of turn to this box depending on what I need, I take out of it, and what I don't, I leave. But one of the other things that I did, Italian opera, my family weren't willing to share, not because just because of the religion, but actually nobody else likes opera in my family. But one of the other things that I like to do is I love afternoon tea. So I will go to length and breadth of the country to sample afternoon tea. So it's one of the things I love the whole process of being waited on. I love the whole process. I know it's going to sound really opposite to what some of my beliefs, but the whole ambience of the atmosphere, the actually talking quite softly and quietly, not being very loud in a space, I find that whole experience really lovely. But that is one thing that I did share with my family. So I have got 5 brothers. I didn't take them all at once, but individually I took them to different afternoon teas to experience. And if you know anything about every culture, food is the essence of every culture. And it's not just one dish, there'll be 10 dishes on the table, and everyone just jumps in and just helps themselves. But afternoon tea is more reserved and controlled, and it's certain. So taking my brothers and work was a big step, but also that helped them to see who I was as a person and also understand me more, that I like things like noise, but I also like quietness and stillness. Also, I prefer to have relationships with my brothers on a one-to-one than all 5 of them together, because it always felt 5 against 1.
I mean, I think that could be a shared experience. I can't imagine anyone find wanting 5 brothers all at once.
Yes, so I think they understood that more, and I felt like sharing some of my experiences with my brothers, which I never did in the past, has helped them to kind of indirectly understand me without me actually having to explain it to them. So for me, I think those things are key. Sometimes we don't get on with family all the time, but it's important to keep those relationships, as much as sometimes they have not supported me and I haven't supported them at times. But one thing is with family is that ultimately they are my go-to people, and I need to have a relationship, whatever that relationship looks like. But one thing I wanted it to be done was on my terms, what I feel comfortable and safe with. And this was my way of doing that.
So thank you for that as well. Is there Anything else regarding self-care you want to add on before we wrap up?
I mean, I'd be interesting to know about your self care now. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask you, but I just always
You
feel,
are invited
yeah,
to ask
yeah.
questions, but guests forget about it when you're in recording.
No, no, but it'd be interesting to hear because obviously everybody understands, self care is just two words, but for every individual, it means something different. So I'm always interested and curious to understand what it means for others as well.
Happily. So I am also one who cringes at the word, but I can't find a better one. So for me, I'm an only child. I'm not married. I don't have children. So I have a lot of space to be self absorbed, first of all, but also have the freedom to do as I please, more than compared to my social circle. However, I realized, especially during my peer support journey, because then it was a purposeful channel to think about stuff when I'm working with people. I realized the initial block we always think are the means. We don't have the money, we don't have the time, we don't have the space. Well, I have all of them and I couldn't do it. So that was interesting. And then it took a long time to realize the blocks in my head. But just to give an experience is my self-care toolbox is my room, the whole room. So I have games in my room. I live in a house share. I have a bookcase in my room. I like to look at them if I'm feeling really down or if it's very early in the morning. And one day I realized I was reading a book. I kind of lost interest. I started it, but I have to finish it. That's the feeling. And then I realized myself, I'm on my own trying to read that book and then eyeing the bookcase almost in a secretive way, as if someone is watching me and being curious about another book. And I'm like, what am I doing right now? Why don't I just, go and get that book? So self care was a journey for me to finding the things I find uncomfortable to do, but enjoyable for myself. And then realizing and balancing the need for justification. But my go to is just coming out of the conceptual space and in day to day, I have a go to easy listening jazz playlist, like with all the standards. If I hear Ella Fitzgerald, it can't be a bad day, almost. And I watch comedy, but not always stand up. Sometimes it could be someone's YouTube program that I find funny. But also when I stopped expecting just to feel good when I'm doing self-care, I think that was a big shift. A lot of us think of naturally, we want to feel good. We want to feel all right. We want to feel like the best day. But there are other types of self-care feelings. It could be that you are processing a thought. You are exploring something. You are doing something without expecting a result would be a sentence for me. So if I can do that, that's my self-care. If I'm able to do something for myself without expecting a result.
Yeah, interesting. Not expecting a result.
It's for me. Someone, my best friend, oldest friend of 36 years since kindergarten, she assumes it's opposite for her. She thinks she needs results.
Yeah.
She needs to get results at some point.
No, no, I can also understand that train of thought. I think for me, it's always been about safety. So for me, the outcome has to be that I feel there has to be the outcome. The outcome has to be whatever I do has to make me feel safe. Because if I don't feel safe, then everything goes out of kilter. So it's not always necessarily about feeling good, but it is about feeling safe, which is, safety is probably my paramount thought is, if I read this, is this gonna, is it gonna make me feel safe? Or I'm feeling unsafe, what can I read to make myself feel safe? So I suppose those kind of things, thoughts go through my head. But I think what you mentioned about in your role as peer work or lived experience work is really key because I think it's important to have something in place, however you see that. Like yourself, you don't necessarily need a result. Mine is about being safe, or it could be that you do want to, have an outcome. But I think it's important that you do have something that works for you because if you imagine you share your sometimes I used to see 4 people in one day, and there was different aspects of my lived experience that obviously I asked permission if it's okay to share. And if somebody said yes, then I've shared 4 pieces of me in one day. And sometimes you can walk away feeling a bit drained or feeling emotionally really tired. So how do I bolster that when I have to come back home to a child who actually is going to need my emotional strength as well? So in my mind, it was always about, like, it's important to have something so that you can do that.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure that's like that for a lot of our peer workers, in the sense that everybody, I'm hoping, will have something in place that makes them. What's that? I have to tell you something really funny. I'm not sure it's appropriate, but there's a story my brother was telling me, and he was in a coffee shop. And my brother is kind of one generation after me. There's a big age gap between me and my last brother. So he's in his late 30s. So he was saying to me, I was in a coffee shop getting a coffee, and I could hear, I think he called them Gen Zs. So they're probably in their 20s or age bracket. And they were talking about how they feel so drained after work and they need to go home and work on their social energy. So my brother was listening to this conversation. And as he was saying it to me, he was saying to me, did we ever think about re-energizing our social energy? What is it the next generation go to work, they barely do any work, they come home, and then all their parents or whoever it is that their caregivers are looking after their ironing, cooking and everything, and they're actually saying they need to focus on their social energy. And I said, do you know what, maybe a bit of that is what we all need to do, is kind of focus on our social energy. So it suddenly dawned on me, rather than using the word self-care, maybe we all need to focus on re-strengthening our social energy.
I'll stay with self-care. But I get your point. I think I'll stay with self-care. It's just my laziness. Anyway, thank you for this conversation, Selina. It was great.
Thank
And
you
I hope
very
our
much.
audience enjoyed it as well. And thank you to our listeners. This was Community of Excellence podcast. And until the next episode, thank you for listening.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Community of Excellence podcast. We hope these conversations help break stigma, build understanding, and remind you that healing is possible, especially when we come together. If you have been affected by anything in this episode, please know you're not alone. Support is available. You can speak to your GP or a mental health professional. For urgent mental health support in North London, contact the crisis line on 0800 151 0023. You can also call Samaritans anytime on 116 123. For free confidential support, you can text SHOUT to 85258. You can also call Calm Helpline on 0800 585858. Until next time, keep connecting and keep believing in the power of lived experience. This is more than a conversation, it's a movement.